We're preparing for new bottom paint. What it has on here now is a few coats of old ablative type, and we're starting to sand it off on this side. Got most of it off, and we're going to raise the bottom paint up to the top of the old boot stripe here and eliminate the boot stripe. And these are the sanders we're using: a 5-inch rotary with 60 grit, follow up by a orbital sander with 60 grit. We've sanded off most of the anti-fouling on the bottom paint, and next we're getting the topsides and the deck ready for painting over the original gel coat. It's not in too bad a shape other than some of these patches of holes. So we're going to be spraying Allcraft 2000 over a Interlux epoxy prime coat, and we'll start by sanding this with 120 grit before spraying the primer. Later we'll come back and do the anti-fouling after the other painting is done. We've already taped up the varnished and taped up the tow rail and teak rub rail. On deck here we're going to finish up with Kiwi Grip non-skid, but first we have to paint all the gloss trim areas, which we're preparing now. And we're going to sand everything with 80 grit first where it has repairs, and then finish with 120 to spray the primer. And we had quite a bit of gel coat crazing and cracking, as is common on these older boats. So what I've done is I've taken the metal cutting disc on an angle grinder and just cut out, notched the little crack lines. You can see where they're darker here. That's where the grinder just went through the gel coat. You don't want to go too deep into the fiberglass though, not at all into the fiberglass, just notch the gel coat because it's a cosmetic more than structural issue. I think most of this cracking and crazing was because the gel coat aged and shrank and weathered, and so it just has little cracks on the surface. Now there's a little bit of flexing that could be going on, but hopefully the epoxy that I've put in on these cracks, which is a thickened epoxy with silica powder, will be strong enough to resist any future opening of those cracks. If they were more severe or deeper, we'd grind off all the gel coat, add a layer of fiberglass, and sand that, and then paint over. As I sand, I'm marking little scratches and dings with blue tape to come back and fill them later. For larger repairs, the fairing compound I use is either Alex Seal or another epoxy like West System with 407 additive. But then for minor nicks and scratches, I'll either use this 3M filler, which is like the Bondo here. The Bondo's cheaper, can also use that. And that's a polyester auto body type filler that you put the cream hardener in to mix it, and it comes out like this, and it hardens very fast. If you want to get sanding quickly, then put in a little extra hardener and you can sand within an hour usually, whereas the epoxy you'd have to wait at least a full day. These cockpit locker lids didn't have any framing underneath to help keep the water out. All they had was these two little blocks of wood here, to support the lid when it's closed. So I'm building up some framing, and we'll get that all leveled and put a rubber gasket underneath the lid so that water won't come in even when the boat's heeled. Here's a cockpit locker lid that when I was walking on it, I noticed it was feeling spongy underfoot, and then I tapped it with a hammer and had a very dull sound, so I knew it was rotted, probably from the bolts that held the hinges on. Got into the balsa core. So I've cut this bottom skin off with the oscillating tool, and there inside, this was all wet and crumbly and delaminated. So we're going to scrape out all that core, put in a new foam core board of Divinycell, and then fiberglass the skin back on. Now normally we have to do this work from on top because we can't fight gravity underneath the deck, but in this case with the hatch we can more easily repair it from below. We've ground out the fiberglass, beveled the edge, and cut some 3/8 inch Divinycell, and I've taken this serrated trowel and put thickened epoxy into the bottom and wetted out the bottom of this with epoxy resin. And then we'll put some weight on this to hold it flat while it hardens, and then tomorrow come back and sand it and put the fiberglass on top. We're painting the interior. The gel coat surfaces that are rough or damaged, and some of the bulkheads that have teak patterned formica that were in bad shape. Repaint those. Ones that are in good shape, we'll leave them as is. And we're using pre-coat primer with a 1/4 inch nap mohair roller, short nap roller, and then sand that lightly, and then we're applying 2 coats of Easy Cabin Coat. Now it comes in only in white. It's a semi-gloss and mold resistant paint, good for interiors. You don't need to sand between coats. If the primer doesn't cover well though, it will need 3 coats because it's quite thin. And because I'm not fond of stark white paint in the interior, I've tinted it to a ivory off-white using 45 drops of brown universal colorant and 30 drops of yellow per quart. We finished spraying 3 coats of epoxy prime coat primer on the top sides, and now to make it easier to sand, because it's hard to see when you've got it sanded flat with that white surface everywhere, we're going to put on this black powder guide coat. It's some type of black carbon or graphite. This one is mica, it works good. You take out this foam pad, put it there, turn it upside down, turn it a little bit, put it back. Now it's loaded with powder, ready to apply. So it's filling all the low spots in the primer. Because I sprayed this primer very smooth, it only requires a fairly light sanding with 320 grit before paint. If it went on a little rougher, we'd hit it with 220 first, followed by 320. And for around the corners we use this slower working square sander, and for the large areas this cuts faster, the 5-inch random orbital. You can see the black powder is disappearing slowly, but there's still a speckled orange peel look where it hasn't been sanded quite enough. So we keep sanding until there's no more dark spots. This way we know it's absolutely flat. For when we spray our gloss finish, you won't see this orange peeling look in the final paint. This stuff is expensive, but one can should do several boats. And I know I'll never sand another boat without it. So, first coat of paint, got 30 pounds of pressure, full mixture, and mostly open fan. We've eliminated the boot stripe and we're painting the bottom paint right up to the topsides paint, and we're going to finish up with black. But to start with, we've got a blue hard bottom paint, copper based, Trinidad, and we've got one coat of that on as a base, and we're going to follow it with 3 coats of an ablative copper paint. And that way can potentially delay your haul out beyond 1 or 2 years. As you scrub the bottom and the ablative comes off, you'll see patches of blue, and that will be an indication that you're down to the hard bottom paint. And so you can either haul out to redo the ablative, or you can delay and the barnacles won't stick hard, because at least you've still got a hard bottom paint that will stay on there a long time no matter how hard you scrub it, which is better than going through all the ablative and straight to a gel coat or epoxy barrier coat, and then all the growth will stick hard to it like cement. So it's just a way to delay the next haul out if you need to. Now, the reason to put ablative on the top is because it seems to work a little better in these warm waters than just the hard bottom paint. For this Cape Dory 27, it takes just a little over 3 quarts per coat, and I'm using a short nap mohair roller. The deck trim paint is finished, and we still have to mask off and do the non-skid with Kiwi grip. And first we're getting some of the deck hardware installed that's going in the areas that are not non-skid. And we have folding cleat here with a teak base we've added, and longer jib sheet tracks. These are 7 feet instead of the original 4 feet. And I bent them slightly to match the curve of the hull. The tow rails have been coated with Cetal natural teak, and then I put a bead of life caulk, black polysulfide, on all the joints to help waterproof those joints. These are the biggest heavy-duty folding cleats I could find for midship cleats, and the reason we want them folding is so that when you're sailing and the jib sheet is flogging during tacking, that it's not going to snag on the cleat, and then you have to go forward and untangle it. So folding cleat is a good idea. And these are 8.5-inch overall and about just over 8" on the cleat size. They come with this retaining plate that adds some friction so that it's not flopping down. Once it's up, it'll stay up. So these will be handy when approaching the dock, especially single-handed. You can have a loop of line tied here with a loop in the end, and as you come in you toss it over a cleat on the dock. That will pull the boat in at the center instead of pulling just the bow or the stern in. And below I've glassed in a backing plate to spread the load, and it's going through the whole deck flange, so it's immensely strong. We've got most of the deck hardware on. Still have to do the Dyneema lifelines and prepare the rigging, finish off electrical and plumbing, and we can launch and do our sea trials.